Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for 3,000 Years of Longing. And this film, we do center on the character of Alethea Benny. She is this scholar of sorts who is venturing on a business trip to Istanbul. And while there, she ends up stumbling across this ancient bottle. Eventually, she finds that this bottle contains a jinn, or a genie, who basically gives her the opportunity to make 3 wishes. But Alethea is pretty content within her life. She doesn't really have any she doesn't really have any hopes and desires and no real dreams of wanting to make these wishes. And as the film goes on, these two kind of start to recount certain events within their life to each other, which hopefully gives her the opportunity to maybe start to rethink if she does have any real desires within her life. So 3,000 Years of Longing, I was hyped out of my mind for this film. I mean, knowing George Miller was back directing a movie after so long, that alone had me very excited. He's one of the most imaginative and just creative directors out there. I was very excited to see what he was going to do. But then looking into the plot of this movie seemed very different, something that we don't really get to see before. You know, a movie about this very different kind of genie and things like that. I was very excited to see how that was going to go. You know, really love the cast that was involved. I love the visual style. This really seemed like it had a very strong opportunity to be one of the best movies of the entire summer. I really was just excited to see how this film, was going to end up playing out. I thought it had so many interesting ideas behind it. The marketing, all of that was just great for this film. I was very excited to see how this film was going to turn out, and it kind of disappointed me. Look, 3,000 Years of Longing is in no way a bad movie. There are a lot of things to like about it. It just ends up being a much more frustrating experience than I really was hoping for. But we are just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast. And I think that easily is one of the best elements of this movie. I mean, you put actors like Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba in your movie, who are some of the best working today. They're probably going to give some really strong performances, and they absolutely crush these roles. Let's first talk about Tilda Swinton, who very much is the main character of this movie. She, as always, does a really great job here. I think she plays this character that feels very content within her life. She feels like she has pretty much everything established. But as the movie goes on, you start to realize there are more nuances about her. There's more to this character, and I think Swinton did a really good job with playing this role overall. She's somebody that's always very dynamic to watch, and you really can't look away whenever she's on screen, and that very much is still the case here. I really did like what she ended up doing within this movie, but my God, it is Idris Elba who really just kills it within this entire film. He really is the standout here. He is, I think, the reason to watch this movie alone. I mean, he is just fantastic in this movie. The character himself of the Jinn is somebody who has gone through a lot within his life. He's faced a lot of emotion, a lot of heartbreak, and Elba really does a great job of channeling all of that. You can see how much this character has been through, but how self-reflective he's kind of becoming. I think he just does a really great job with that within this film. He really shows the desire of this genie who always wanted more than what he was offered, and how he's really kind of gotten to this point. It is such a phenomenal performance. As the film goes, you start to learn more and more layers about this character as the film goes on, and Elba's performance just becomes stronger as a result. He is just fantastic in this movie, and I think the rapport between these two is really strong here. I thought these two overall worked really well together, and definitely are one of the best elements of this movie for sure. Now we got to get to the directing and the writing here, which George Miller's directing is definitely not one of the problems with this movie. I think his directing here is still very strong within this film. There's a lot that he is trying to say, and I think he does a really good job with it. I think Miller's really trying to tap into, a lot of adventurous and very fantastical themes, and he really does do that here. He takes some pretty big swings with this movie, and that's something you expect from Miller. I mean, this is not a director that in any way is going to feel restrained, and I think he does do a really good job with that here. He puts a lot of effort into this film. His, imagination and things like that is fully on display within this movie, and I think his directing still does work really well within this film. I think that he is still just such a incredible talent, and, everything that he accomplishes directing-wise, I think he does do a really good job with. Even when the film starts to veer in a direction that I really didn't like, I thought Miller's directing still was strong in this movie. He clearly did have a vision for this film, and I do think that he overall did, I think he overall did showcase that. The problem really comes down to the writing, and this is really where we get to the areas in the film that just didn't really work for me very much at all, which, with that being said, I don't think all of the writing in this film is terrible. Honestly, the film kind of had me for a bit. The way this movie starts off, I actually did like quite a bit. The introduction to Althea, we see her in the beginning of this movie. She's someone who, she just seems kind of okay with herself. She is a teacher, and that's really all she kind of wants. She is kind of, she's kind of reclusive in that way. She doesn't interact with many people, but she's okay with that. She kind of likes the way her life is turning out. And I think the movie does a good job of presenting that, presenting her as somebody who feels perfectly okay with the life that she has right now and doesn't really want much deviation from it. But then once she comes across the character of the Jinn, this really starts to open up her mind a little bit more. And what follows, I thought, was very fascinating. The first 2 acts of this movie kind of function as like an anthology series of sorts. We see these two within a hotel room, and they're kind of trading different stories to each other, mostly based around the Jinn's previous interactions. And this, I think, is easily the highlight of the entire film. It gives us a really good chance to see this character and the different lives that he's had, the different people he stumbled across, and kind of the regrets that he has within his life. It's really well handled the way they decided to go about it, and I thought that, all of these stories are really interesting to watch. They all kind of have to do with love and desires and kind of, wanting more in your life than what you have had, and kind of like, and kind of like going beyond your limits in that way. And I think the movie does get into that very well. I found each of the stories that were in this movie, they themselves could have been their own film, and I really found myself gravitating towards the Jinn as a character because he is somebody who has a lot of regrets. These interactions he had, they didn't really go the way that he had hoped, and I think the film does a really good job of representing that. There's a lot that the movie's trying to dive into with that, and I think all of that is very well done. I think all the fantastical stories within this movie, I really did appreciate. The interactions between these two, where Alethea herself is just not really want to make a lot of wishes, is a lot of fun. It's a very fun concept at first, because you have this character who his sole purpose is to grant wishes, but you have a character that almost has no interest in it whatsoever and is constantly trying to push against it, and I think that's a really fun concept for the movie. The problem really becomes when the film tries to go beyond that. Whenever we are transported back to the main story within this film, it really doesn't work at all. There is a decision that is made about halfway through this movie, and the second this decision is made, the movie almost completely lost me from there. Not because of the actual decision, it's what led up to the decision just doesn't really make any sense. There was nothing building up to this that hinted at this decision being made, that hinted at this choice being a thing. The movie starts to become a lot more of this romance in a way, and I just don't think it worked in any particular way. It just didn't really work in the slightest, mainly because of just how unearned so much of it really did feel. And the movie itself turns into almost a completely different movie after that. And once it did veer into, that territory, the movie just didn't really work for me after that. I don't think they did a very good job with that. within this movie, especially because we're not really given a lot of time to really dive into this decision. The movie montages through a lot of stuff, and after that, I just felt that there was a real missed opportunity here. And I think really the glaring issue is the character of Althea. She just feels very underdeveloped. She's very hard to connect to, not just because of the fact that she herself is so like well adjusted within her life, but there just isn't a lot to latch onto within her character. And I understand that this is intentional. They are trying to make her somebody who doesn't really have a lot, and she's okay with that. But the problem is, like, later on in the film, there are legitimate ideas that are presented that the film just doesn't really do much with, and as a result, it just feels like missed potential at the end of the day. I found myself very frustrated by the screenplay, because once the film does switch gears and really turns into this romance, it just really feels like the problems with the film are so much more glaring in that way. There were issues I was having prior to the movie, but once they started to dive more into the present day story, it is clear that really is the issue within this film. I think also the chemistry between both of these actors, it just wasn't really there. Yes, it was there in terms of, I think when these first two meet, the back and forth, it works, but in terms of like a romantic chemistry, I don't think they did a very good job with that, and it just made this such a puzzling sort of decision to me. I didn't really understand what the movie was trying to say. What is the message that we're really trying to get at here, especially with the way the movie ends? I just found myself so deeply unsatisfied by the directions this movie went in. So overall, I just found this to be a very confusing and very just very frustrating screenplay overall. Even some characters that are introduced in the beginning of the movie, you know, that kind of feel like throwaways, suddenly they are of much greater importance within the third act of this movie, and it just didn't really work. It felt like they needed to do a better job of really setting up everything to really get us on board with this decision that's made, and I just didn't really feel like the movie did what it needed to in that regard. That being said, in terms of cinematography, I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find a film that doesn't have more stunning and absolutely mesmerizing cinematography than this one this year. I mean, the visual storytelling and all of that is one of the best parts of this movie. Like I said, the creative risks that Miller takes really does pay off within this movie, especially when it comes to the more fantastical elements. I mean, it is so well shot in this film. You really feel like you get a sense of each of these worlds, each of these different time periods. Each of them kind of have their own specific style to them, and I think Miller did such an incredible job with it. And John Seale's cinematography is just exquisite here. It's something that you really can't take your eyes off of. The movie is so colorful in that way, and I just really love everything about the cinematography here, all of the different stories that we venture with. I mean, there's so many incredible shots within this movie, and I just really loved what they were able to do, or specifically the first story that the Jin tells. The way all of that was handled in terms of cinematography was incredible. I loved everything going on in terms of visuals here. I think it's easily one of the strongest parts of this movie. And the score by Tom Holkenborg is fantastic. I mean, I think Junkie XL, he's always been a great composer, and that really is no different here. I think he does give a really good sort of somber score to this movie that I do think works very well. And the editing, I think, is also kind of an issue here. I think the movie itself is just a little too short. The direction that the movie ends up taking within the third act, just feels like it needed more expanding upon. We needed more time to really soak in this decision, to really get us on board with it, and because the movie just kind of rushes through it, I don't think they did a very good job with that. I think the way everything was paced leading up to that was fine, but the second that the movie veers more into this new, into this new sort of, idea, the movie just doesn't, it's not nearly as well paced after that. So really everything that was working in this movie just isn't working as well after this was introduced. 3,000 Years of Longing just was a very middling experience for me. There are so many things that I wanted to like about this movie. I think the chemistry between these two actors, are very strong. Idris Elba gives such an incredible performance here. There is some really great visual storytelling on display. That is something that Miller has always been amazing with and still continues to be here. The movie has a lot of really interesting ideas, a lot of very different concepts, but it goes in a direction in the third act that just feels completely unearned, and between that and some very underutilization of characters and a bunch of other things that just didn't feel as important as they should, this movie just didn't fully come together for me in the way that I was hoping. I will sadly end up imagining, I think this really is one of those movies where, like, the more I think about it, I'm just going to think about how much better it really could have been. I think there are so many more ideas that this movie could have expanded upon. I think there's so much more that Miller could have gotten out of this movie, but unfortunately, I just found this film to be incredibly puzzling as I watched. I really just felt like as the movie was going on, it was losing more sight of its potential. After all of the fantastical elements were thrown away, the movie just doesn't really have a lot to show after that. And while I will continue to praise Miller, I'll continue to praise the visuals, I'll continue to praise Hulkenberg, this one unfortunately was very much a miss, and it did not quite work for me in the way that I was hoping. It's never boring. It's definitely never boring. It did capture my attention the entire time, but it just went in a few directions that I just don't think quite worked for this film. I don't think it was a totally satisfying experience, and overall, I did find myself pretty let down by this one, so I am going to give 3,000 Years of Longing overall a C+. But over, guys, in my review of 3,000 Years of Longing. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie at all, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.